they're doing a good thing. I think when you talk about al-Qaeda in a negative light, you need to talk about the Syrians in an equally negative light. If you want to talk about strategic reasons why someone might think that the West is better off if Assad stays in power, that's a discussion for another day. But frankly, I think it's time for Assad to go. As far as al-Qaeda goes, I don't think they should be put into power. I think it's up to the United States to strengthen the Free Syrian Army factions, which are not linked to al-Qaeda, and to work with our allies to keep them out. And it's not for Israel, it's for the security of the free world, ultimately.
Mr. Mackey, would you say, however, that the conditions are allowing that to happen, that actually al-Qaeda will not be able to rule, for instance, in a post-Assad environment or gain any foothold in the country?
I think when he mentions the free world, he must be talking about Russia and China and Brazil and South Africa and the states who support the insurgents, who don't support the insurgency in Syria. He talks about the states who actually support the Syrian government against terrorism. Assad remaining in power is not necessarily an issue which has to be imposed on the Syrian people and the Syrian state by external observers or external states who've had an atrocious colonial history in the region. Assad remaining in power is strictly a decision which has to be made by the Syrian people, and it has to be any Syrian-led political process which decides whether he stays into power or not. It is not an issue which should be taken by the United States or any of their allies in the region. Whether the United States supports al-Qaeda, it's not an issue of whether it remains to be seen. It is clear the United States supports the toppling of Assad at any costs. It deals with Turkey and Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And these states are the prime states who are funding the insurgency, who are giving weapons and money to al-Qaeda and giving them bases to launch attacks on the Syrian army from. And it is not a concept of glorifying the Syrian army or the Syrian government, but the fact that al-Qaeda is present should make the US cautious in taking steps politically in terms of the Middle East. But the US are not being cautious. They're supporting al-Qaeda, they're supporting the extremist rebel insurgency. And the West, in terms of Britain and France, are training the Syrian rebels in Jordan. They're sending non-lethal aid to them in Turkey. So the United States has a policy of hypocrisy and double standards in saying that they don't want the extremists to come into power, yet supporting them through the very means that they say they're not in the first place. And this is not being done directly, it is done through proxy. So the United States is using Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Qatar to support the insurgency without using direct means. Why then would the United Nations, the European Union be buying oil from Syrian opposition-led towns and places and giving them support financially when they know that the majority of these places where there is oil reserves are held by the extremist opposition? Is this not directly arming and giving money to al-Qaeda through weapons and giving them a supply line which the Syrian government is trying to cut off?
Well, let's allow our guest in Berkeley to respond to that. Mr. Kaplan, Russia has also come out against this. It's been saying that it's against international law to give this kind of assistance to militants there. And again, the question, with the United States insisting on this goal of toppling Assad, getting rid of him for this crisis to be resolved according to the US, is it going too far? Because a lot of people are saying that it's losing face now in the international community because of its support for those who are carrying out terrorist attacks in the country.
Let me point out something here. My opponent there is doing something that I call lying by omission. He is presenting the idea that the Assad regime is being a victim of the United States and that the allies of his regime are democracies, which they are not. The exception, Russia, you might consider a democracy, but it's really a tentative one. The Chinese and the Iranians are certainly not a democracy. There have been transitional plans proposed to end the fighting in Syria, but they require that Bashar Assad resign and leave. He won't do it. He is the catch-22 to keeping this war from ending and all these people from getting killed. He will not step down. And the transitional movement, which has been proposed by the European Union, by the United States, by the UN, to create a new government there and create peace and stop all the killing, is because of one man named Bashar Assad who will not resign and step down from the government.
Sorry for jumping in, Mr. Kaplan. Do you think then, I'll just get this comment, I'll come back to you, Mr. Mackey. Mr. Kaplan, do you think, however, that lifting the oil embargo or even lifting the arms embargo is going to help this, or it's just going to create more chaos?
I don't think it's going to create chaos. I mean, Assad has to go. Again, I'm not saying I'm in favor of Al-Qaeda taking over. It's up to the United States and the West to do everything they can to try and prevent that from happening. However, we can't stop the momentum of making the Assad regime leave. And they are every bit as guilty, if not more, of terrorism in that region, of murdering Arab people, Muslim people, other people in the region, and also, frankly, they also encourage the possibility of encroaching war between the West, the United States, and Iran over the nuclear issue, because Assad has been a staunch supporter of Iran and of the Hezbollah.
Okay, now, Mr. Maki, we are a little short of time. Quickly, if you can, do you think that if Assad did decide to resign, that the transitional plan would work and things would actually be resolved?
Of course not, because the struggle is geopolitical. It's not about Assad's personality or Assad remaining in power. I mean, the ultimate hypocrisy when your guest discusses the Middle East through an Orientalist perspective, as if he's dividing colonies of old, is absolutely ridiculous. The fact that the allies of the so-called Syrian revolution are states which have won families which have ruled for the last 60 years, the fact that Bahrain, the fact that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, these states are not perfectionist democracies. These are states who have significant human rights violations, who are not democratic by any stretch of imagination, states who have brutal secret services, who have a state security apparatus which has been killing for decades. So it is not a question of democracy or not. The friends of Syria, the so-called friends of Syria, are the same as the friends of Israel. Israel is not a perfect democracy. It is a security state. So we cannot discuss the concept of having a security state in Syria. The United States of America has killed more people, and in terms of humanitarian wise, in the world than the Syrian government by a long stretch. So it is real double standards when the United States discusses the concept of humanitarianism, when their direct funding for the Al-Qaeda militants ensures that this insurgency continues and that more Syrians die. So there is a direct link between the United States funding the opposition and Syrians dying. If the Americans stop, the war would stop.
Okay, I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you very much. Danny Maki there, Syrian political activist, with us live from London. A big thank you to our guest in Berkeley as well, Lee Kaplan, investigative journalist. You're watching the debate here on Press TV. Thank you so much for staying with us. From me, Homa Lesgi. Until our next programme, it's goodbye.